He came to the frozen mountains to disappear. A U.S. Army veteran, broken by war and silence, drove into the snow with only his German shepherd beside him. No plans, no future. Just cold and distance from the world that no longer felt like home. Then the storm erased everything. Wind howled, snow blinded the trail, and fear settled in. The kind that tells you no one is coming. Suddenly, Rex barked. Sharp, urgent, different. Ethan turned. He ran. Through the white silence, he found her, collapsed, freezing, barely alive. And in that moment, the man who wanted to vanish realized something terrifying and beautiful. He was still needed. Ethan Walker didn't leave town the way people usually did. There were no goodbyes, no final look in the mirror, no dramatic moment where he decided everything was over. He simply stopped explaining himself. The morning he left, the sky was the color of old steel, flat, quiet, indifferent. Ethan pulled on his faded multicam jacket, the fabric softened by years of wear and weather. The kind of jacket that didn't keep you warm so much as it reminded you that you had endured worse. He settled the U.S. Army veteran cap low on his brow, the brim casting a shadow over eyes that rarely rested on the present for long. 2 dog tags hung against his chest, dull and scratched, clinking softly when he moved. Regulation length, regulation silence. The black military watch on his wrist was oversized, practical, built for men who measured time by seconds that mattered. It still worked. Everything he owned still worked. He just didn't. Rex waited by the door. The German shepherd sat upright, posture straight, muscles coiled beneath a brown and black coat that looked like it had been cut from the same cloth as Ethan's past. Functional, disciplined, scarred by experience. His ears stood tall, alert without tension. A tactical collar circled his neck, worn but secure. The name Rex stitched cleanly across the patch. Not a pet, a partner. Rex didn't wag his tail. He didn't whine or pace. He watched Ethan the way soldiers watch their team leader. Quietly, constantly, ready to move the moment the decision was made. Ethan paused by the door longer than necessary. Not because he was unsure, because part of him was still listening for something he already knew wouldn't come. No voice told him to stay. No reason arrived to change his mind. So he opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean, stripping the room of warmth and memory in a single breath. Rex rose instantly, falling into step beside him without command. They moved together like they always had, Ethan leading by presence rather than words, Rex matching his pace with absolute trust. The truck was old but dependable. Ethan preferred things that didn't surprise him. He tossed his pack behind the seat, climbed in, and rested his hands on the steering wheel. For a moment, he just sat there, staring through the windshield at a street that had once felt like home. Once. He didn't think about the marriage. Thinking implied there were still questions left to answer. There weren't. Some endings came quietly, without blame or explosions. Those were the ones that stayed with you the longest. Ethan turned the key. The engine started on the first try. They drove north, then west, then farther than most people bothered to go unless they were running from something or toward it. Ethan told himself it was neither. He told himself he was simply returning to a place that didn't ask questions. The cabin sat deep in the high country, miles from the nearest town, perched along a ridge where winter arrived early and stayed late. It had belonged to family once. That was reason enough. Rex rode in the passenger seat, sitting tall, head angled toward the cracked window. Snow dusted his muzzle as the road narrowed and trees pressed in closer, their branches heavy with white. His amber eyes tracked the forest with calm precision, as if reading a language the land was speaking just for him. Ethan noticed. He always noticed Rex. That habit had kept them both alive before. The farther they climbed, the quieter the world became. The radio cut out without warning, the signal swallowed by elevation and distance. The GPS flickered, spun uselessly, then went dark. Ethan didn't react. He adjusted his grip, eased off the gas, and followed the road as it faded from pavement to packed snow. This was familiar territory. Not the place, but the feeling. Isolation had weight, pressure. A way of revealing who you were when no one else was watching. The last plowed road ended at a rusted sign half buried in snow. Ethan turned off anyway, tires crunching into a narrow track that looked less like a road and more like a suggestion someone had once made and never corrected. Rex shifted. Not anxious, alert. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Not in fear, but in recognition. The same instinct that once told him when a street was wrong, when silence meant danger instead of peace. The forest thickened. Wind moved sideways between the pines, carrying snow in fine sheets that erased distance and depth. Time stretched. The world narrowed to headlights, breath, and the steady sound of tires holding their line. Then the cabin appeared. It rose from the slope like it had grown there. Dark logs, weathered by decades of snow and sun. Roof pitched steep to shed the weight of winter. No smoke from the chimney, no light in the windows. It didn't look abandoned. It looked patient. Ethan parked and shut off the engine. The sudden silence pressed in, heavy enough to feel against his ears. Rex was out of the truck before Ethan fully opened his door, boots crunching softly as he stepped into the snow. The dog circled once, nose low, reading the ground. When he reached the front steps, he stopped, sat, positioned squarely in front of the door, blocking it, not aggressively, but decisively. Ethan studied him for a long moment. "You good?" he asked quietly. Rex didn't look back. His ears remained forward, gaze fixed on the door, as if listening to something beneath the wood and iron. Ethan joined him, the cold biting through his gloves. He rested a hand briefly on Rex's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth beneath thick fur. The contact steadied him more than he expected. He reached for the handle. The door opened without resistance. Inside, the air was cold, but not stale. Pine, old ash, clean wood. Ethan stepped fully inside, closing the door behind him. The wind cut off instantly, replaced by a dense, deliberate quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't echo. The kind that listened back. Rex crossed the threshold last, moving slowly, scanning corners, reading shadows. He circled once, then positioned himself near the door, body angled toward it, head up, guarding. Ethan shrugged off his jacket and hung it on a peg by the wall. The wood was worn smooth from use. Not neglect, use. He noticed the stacked firewood beside the hearth, dry, sorted by size, ready. His chest tightened, not painfully, but with the unsettling sense that something here had been arranged with intention. No one prepared a place like this to be forgotten. Ethan stood still, the weight of the room settling around him. He had come here to disappear, to rest in the absence of expectation. Instead, standing there with Rex at his side, he felt something else entirely. Not peace, not danger, but the unmistakable feeling that he had arrived somewhere that still mattered, and that whatever he had tried to leave behind had not stayed behind him. Outside, the wind climbed the ridge. Inside, the cabin waited. So did Rex. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan Walker did not move away from the feeling. He stayed. Ethan didn't light the fire right away. He stood near the center of the cabin, hands loose at his sides, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. The light that filtered through the small windows was thin and cold, stretched pale by snow and cloud. It revealed more than it hid, and what it revealed unsettled him. Everything was ready. Not staged, not newly repaired, but maintained. The floorboards bore scratches and scuffs, the honest wear of years, not neglect. A heavy wooden table stood near the window, its surface marked by knife lines and faint burn circles, as if meals had been eaten quickly and without ceremony. A kettle sat on the stove, empty, clean, positioned exactly where a hand would reach for it without looking. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose. This wasn't how abandoned places felt. Rex moved with deliberate caution, nails clicking softly against the floor. He didn't roam aimlessly the way dogs often did in new spaces. He checked corners, paused near the back wall, lowered his head to sniff along the seam where log met floor. Then he stopped. Ethan noticed immediately. The German shepherd stood still, ears forward, body angled toward a narrow section of wall near the rear of the cabin. His posture wasn't tense, but it was focused, like a man listening through static for a signal he recognized. Ethan followed his gaze. Nothing obvious. No movement. No sound. Just wood, shadow, and the steady hush of wind outside. "All right," Ethan murmured. "We'll get settled." Rex didn't move, but the low alert in his chest eased just enough for Ethan to continue. Ethan set his pack down and moved toward the hearth. The stone fireplace dominated the far wall, its interior blackened but clean. He crouched, fingers brushing ash that hadn't yet absorbed moisture. Dry. Recent. His jaw tightened. He struck a match. The flame caught immediately, licking up the kindling as if it had been waiting. Logs shifted with a soft crack as heat began to spread, the cabin responding without protest. No groan, no complaint. Just acceptance. Like an old soldier waking slowly, carefully. As warmth crept outward, Ethan felt it in his shoulders first. Not relaxation. Release. The kind that came only when your body realized, belatedly, that it wasn't in immediate danger. Rex repositioned himself closer to the hearth, but not to sleep. He sat, back straight, eyes on the door, still on watch. Ethan took off his gloves and flexed his fingers, the ache in his knuckles dull but familiar. He glanced at the watch on his wrist. The black military face stared back at him, steady, precise. Time still moved here. It hadn't stopped just because he wanted it to. He scanned the cabin more carefully now. On a narrow shelf near the stairs leading to the loft, he spotted a dented metal tin wrapped in yellowed oilcloth. It didn't look decorative. It looked protected. Ethan approached slowly, as if sudden movement might break whatever balance existed in the room. He lifted the tin, surprised by its weight. Inside lay a leather-bound notebook. Old, used, handled often. When he opened it, the smell of paper and smoke rose faintly into the air. The handwriting was tight and slanted, efficient. No wasted space, no unnecessary words. Not a journal. a log. Ethan turned a few pages. Wind from the north bends sound toward the ravine. Snowpack unstable after second thaw. Avoid eastern slope after dusk. Light visible from lower trail only when wind shifts southwest. Ethan's brow furrowed. This wasn't the writing of a man waiting to die alone. This was the writing of someone paying attention. Rex rose and padded over, nails tapping softly. He sniffed the notebook once, then sat beside Ethan, amber eyes lifting to meet his face. The look was unmistakable. Recognition. "You've been here before," Ethan said quietly. Not a question. Rex's ears flicked once. He turned his head toward the window facing the slope, as if confirming a memory neither of them had spoken aloud. Ethan closed the notebook slowly. The thought settled into his chest with uncomfortable weight. This cabin hadn't been kept for solitude. It had been kept for readiness. Ethan moved through the rest of the space with new caution. He tested beams, checked window seams, noted how the walls had been reinforced against prevailing winds. Everything bore the mark of foresight rather than optimism. Near the back wall, Ethan reached toward a loose plank. Rex stepped directly into his path. Not growling, not barking, blocking. Ethan frowned slightly. Easy. He shifted his weight to step around the dog. The floor gave a sharp creak, then a crack. The board beneath where Ethan had been about to stand flexed downward, revealing a pocket of rot hidden beneath an old repair. Ethan froze. Heart thudding once, hard. Rex didn't move. He stood firm, eyes steady, as if to say, "That's far enough." Ethan stepped back, breath slow and controlled. He crouched, inspecting the damage. The rot was deep, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. His throat tightened. In another life, he would have missed it. In another moment, he might have fallen through. He straightened slowly, resting his hand on Rex's collar. The tactical webbing was warm beneath his palm. "Good catch," he said. Rex's tail gave one restrained thump. Later, Ethan ate a simple meal by the fire. Dried meat, bread, water warmed just enough to take the edge off the cold. The kind of meal he'd eaten countless times before, never expecting comfort from it. The firelight shifted across the walls, revealing more details. Hooks worn smooth by repeated use. A coil of rope hung neatly by the door. Spare blankets folded and stored within reach. Prepared, not forgotten. The wind outside strengthened as night fell, snow drifting sideways through the trees. The forest quieted in that particular way it did before weather worsened. Not silent, but held. Ethan felt it settle into his bones. He thought, briefly, of the life he'd left behind. Not with longing, with clarity. Some people feared silence because it forced them to listen. Others learned to survive in it. He had always been the second kind. Near midnight, Rex lifted his head. A low sound gathered in his chest, not a growl, but a warning meant for someone who knew how to hear it. Ethan rose instantly. They stood together near the window, watching the dark slope below. Nothing moved. Yet the sense of presence returned. Not threatening, not urgent. Expectant. Ethan climbed the narrow stairs to the loft. A small cot waited there, its blanket folded too neatly, dustless despite the cold. He knelt, pressing his palm into the fabric. It was warm. Not from the fire, from use. Below him, Rex let out one quiet bark, soft, affirming. Ethan sat back on his heels, the notebook heavy in his hands, and felt the truth settle deeper than thought. He hadn't returned here to hide. He had returned to a place that had been waiting, and whatever waited with it had not finished its work. Ethan woke before the light, not because of a sound, because of a shift. His eyes opened into darkness that felt different from the night before, denser, tighter, like the cabin itself had drawn a breath and was holding it. For a moment he stayed still, listening with his whole body the way he had learned to do years ago, when survival depended on reading what wasn't said. Below him, Rex was already awake. Ethan heard the quiet scrape of nails against wood, the subtle repositioning of weight. No pacing, no anxiety, just readiness. He sat up slowly on the narrow cot, joints stiff from cold and age. The blanket slid off his shoulders, folded too neatly to be accidental. He noticed that again, and this time he didn't push the thought away. Some habits didn't die. They were passed on. Ethan descended the ladder quietly. Rex met him halfway, standing close but not crowding, eyes steady, ears angled toward the eastern wall. "You hear something?" Ethan asked under his breath. Rex didn't answer. He rarely did when it mattered. The fire had burned down to embers, but the cabin still held warmth. Ethan added 2 logs without striking a match. The embers caught immediately, flame rising slow and controlled. Outside, the wind shifted. Not stronger, sharper. Ethan paused, hands still on the fire poker. His chest tightened with a familiar awareness, the kind that never left you once you'd learned it. This wasn't random weather. This was transition. He grabbed the notebook from the table and flipped through it, scanning pages with practiced speed. Wind turns deceptive near ridge after prolonged snowfall. Sound bends. Direction lies. If the air feels wrong, it usually is. Ethan exhaled slowly. Rex stepped closer, nose lifting, drawing in the air like he was tasting it. A low, almost inaudible sound vibrated in his chest. Not a growl, not fear. Information. Ethan pulled on his jacket and boots, movements economical, deliberate. He clipped a short rope to Rex's tactical collar, not because he needed to restrain him, but because sometimes you stayed connected in ways others didn't understand. They stepped outside together. The cold hit hard, slicing through layers with clean precision. Snow moved sideways through the trees, thinning the world into a blur of white and gray. The ridge dropped away sharply beyond the cabin, depth erased by drifting light. Ethan stood still, reading the land. Years ago he would have scanned rooftops, windows, doorways. Now he scanned wind, snowpack, silence. Rex angled his body downslope, ears fixed, tail still. He took 3 steps forward, then stopped abruptly. Ethan followed his gaze. Nothing visible, but the feeling was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was wrong down there. Ethan didn't ask himself whether it was his place to act. That question belonged to a man he no longer was. He tightened his grip on the rope. "All right, show me." Rex moved, not fast, certain. They descended carefully, Rex cutting diagonally across the slope, avoiding sections where the snow lay too smooth, too untouched. Ethan trusted him without hesitation, placing his boots where Rex's paws had been seconds before. The wind played tricks with sound, pulling Ethan's breath away from him, bending it backward so it felt like it came from somewhere else. Snow stung his face, sharp and relentless. This was how people got lost. Not suddenly, gradually.
Rex paused near a cluster of young pines, lowering his head. His posture changed, shoulders squared, body angled protectively. Ethan's heart thudded once. He moved faster now, caution giving way to urgency. And then he saw it. A shape half buried in snow. A torn pack.
Fabric flapping weakly in the wind. Ethan dropped to one knee, clearing snow with gloved hands. A person lay curled on their side, motionless, except for the faintest rise and fall of their chest. An adult woman. Alone. Alive, but barely. Ethan didn't think. He acted. He checked her airway, shielded her face from the wind, spoke calmly, even though he wasn't sure she could hear him. Rex lowered himself beside her immediately, pressing his dense body against hers, radiating heat with deliberate stillness. Good boy. Ethan wrapped her in his jacket, then his spare layer, working quickly but carefully. Hypothermia didn't forgive mistakes. Her eyelids fluttered. A whisper escaped her lips, inaudible but real. That was enough. The climb back to the cabin was brutal. The wind fought them every step, tearing at balance and breath. Ethan's lungs burned, his legs protested, but he didn't slow. Rex led relentlessly, never hesitating, never questioning. When the cabin door finally closed behind them, warmth slammed into cold-soaked bone like a physical force. Ethan laid the woman near the hearth, stripped away wet layers, wrapped her in blankets that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. Rex stayed pressed to her side, head low, eyes watchful. Minutes stretched into something else. Time measured differently. Eventually, color returned to her face, not fully, but enough. Her breathing steadied. She opened her eyes. I thought... Her voice was thin, cracked. I thought no one would come. Ethan shook his head once. You're okay. He didn't add anything else. She drifted back into sleep. Ethan sat back on his heels, exhaustion settling deep into his bones. Rex shifted closer to him now, leaning briefly into his leg. Not celebration, acknowledgement. Ethan looked around the cabin, the fire, the blankets, the notebook on the table. The signs had been there, all of them. This place hadn't been prepared for solitude. It had been prepared for moments like this. Ethan rested his forearms on his knees, staring into the firelight. For the first time since arriving, the truth didn't feel heavy. It felt clear. He had come here thinking he was done. Instead, he had stepped back into a role he'd never truly left. The wind howled outside, louder now, angrier. Inside, the light held, and Ethan Walker understood something he hadn't been ready to name before. Silence wasn't what had been calling him here. Responsibility was. The storm didn't end all at once. It loosened. The wind softened its fists first, no longer striking the cabin, but pushing past it in long, uneven breaths. Snow still fell, but slower now, settling instead of attacking. The world outside began to regain edges, shapes emerging cautiously, as if the mountain itself was testing whether it was safe to be seen again. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. Ethan hadn't slept. He sat in a chair pulled close to the hearth, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped. His multicam jacket lay folded nearby, drying slowly. The dog tags at his chest were still, no longer clicking with movement. For once, nothing needed his immediate attention. Rex lay beside the woman, his body angled toward her, head resting on his paws. He wasn't asleep, not fully. His ears shifted occasionally, tracking changes in sound, posture tightening just enough whenever the wind pressed harder against the walls. Always present. The woman stirred. Ethan noticed instantly. Her breathing changed first, shallower, quicker. Then her fingers twitched beneath the blanket. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, searching the ceiling as if it were a sky she didn't recognize. "Easy," Ethan said quietly. His voice was calm, low, practiced. The same tone he had used countless times before when panic did more harm than injury. She turned her head slightly, eyes landing on him, then drifting to Rex. Her gaze lingered there, confusion giving way to something else. Relief. "I thought," her voice cracked, dry and thin. "I thought I was done." Ethan didn't correct her. He simply said, "You're warm. You're safe." That seemed to anchor her. She swallowed, breathing deeper now, color slowly returning to her cheeks. "I heard something," she said after a moment, "before you found me." Ethan waited. "A sound," she continued. "Not loud, just steady, like someone ringing a bell far away." Ethan glanced down at Rex. A small metal tag hung from the tactical collar, not decorative, not sentimental. It had been added long ago for patrol visibility. It chimed only under very specific conditions, only when the wind shifted just right. Rex lifted his head at the sound of his name. Amber eyes calm, tail thumping once against the floor. "That was him," Ethan said. The woman nodded weakly. "I figured." Silence settled again, not awkward, not heavy, just enough space for truth to breathe. She spoke after a while, told him she had underestimated the mountain, that she had planned carefully, packed lightly, trusted technology too much. When the wind took her tent and the signal died, fear had crept in quietly, without drama, until it was everywhere. "I didn't pray to be rescued," she admitted, staring into the fire. "I just prayed that someone would know I was there." Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Not emotion. Alignment. "You did the right thing," he said. "You stayed put." She gave a faint smile. "Didn't feel like the right thing." "It rarely does." She slept again not long after. Ethan stepped outside just before dawn. The cold bit less now, no longer sharp but insistent. The storm had left its mark. Drifts piled high along the slope, branches bowed under weight, but the worst had passed. The mountain exhaled slowly, sound returning in pieces. Distant creaks, settling snow, the faint crack of ice far below. Rex joined him, sitting at his side, shoulder brushing Ethan's leg. They stood together, looking down the ridge. Ethan noticed the light. Not from the cabin, but from farther away. Headlights, faint and struggling, climbing the narrow track through the trees. Help was coming. Rex noticed first, of course. His ears rotated, posture lifting, alert bark cutting clean through the quiet. Ethan waited. Two vehicles emerged slowly, a weathered service truck and a dark SUV dusted with snow. They stopped near the cabin, doors opening quickly. A man stepped out of the SUV, moving fast despite the cold. He looked exhausted, shoulders slumped beneath a heavy coat, beard untrimmed, eyes frantic as they searched the cabin. "Is she?" he began, voice breaking. "She's alive," Ethan said simply. The man didn't wait for more. He rushed inside, dropping to his knees beside the hearth when he saw her. Relief hit him like a physical force. He pulled her into a careful embrace, whispering her name over and over, as if afraid she might disappear again. Ethan stepped back, giving them space. The second man entered more slowly, older, weathered. He took in the cabin with a long, steady look. Fireplace, table, notebook resting open where Ethan had left it. His eyes narrowed slightly. "This place," he said quietly. "I was wondering when someone would come back." Ethan met his gaze. "You know it?" The man nodded. "Knew the one who kept it." Something in his tone made Ethan straighten. "He used to say storms didn't need stopping," the man continued. "They just needed someone standing where it mattered." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. After they left, after the vehicles disappeared back down the mountain, carrying warmth, gratitude, and relief with them, the cabin felt different. Not emptier, fuller. Ethan stood alone for a long moment. Rex seated beside him, ears forward, calm as ever. He looked at the notebook on the table, at the stacked wood, at the light still burning though morning had come. He had arrived here believing disappearance was peace. Instead, he had found a place that asked something of him. Not loudly, not urgently, just honestly. Ethan reached for the lantern by the door and checked the fuel out of habit. Then he set it back, exactly where it could be found in the dark. Rex watched, unmoving. The mountain waited. And for the first time since the road had narrowed and the world had gone quiet, Ethan Walker did not wonder how long he would stay. He wondered how long the light would need him. The mountains settled slowly after they left. Snow continued to fall, but lightly now, almost respectfully, as if the storm had said what it needed to say and was finished arguing. The cabin held its warmth. The fire burned down to a patient glow. Silence returned, not empty, not heavy, purposeful. Ethan stood by the table long after the vehicles disappeared down the track. He hadn't moved when the door closed. He hadn't watched them go. His attention remained fixed on the notebook resting open beneath the window. Rex sat beside him, posture relaxed but attentive, tail still, ears rotating with distant sound, not guarding the room, watching the hill. Ethan finally reached for the notebook. This time, he didn't flip through it quickly. He read it the way it had been written, slowly, deliberately, line by line. There were no names at first, no dates that marked beginnings or endings, just observations, wind patterns, snow behavior, notes on visibility when clouds dropped low and sound bent strangely through the trees. If the wind turns without warning, expect confusion. Most people panic after the third mistake. Light matters more than direction when fear sets in. Ethan frowned slightly. This wasn't just a record. It was instruction. He turned the page and found something different. Rough sketches of the ridge and surrounding slopes, hand-drawn maps marked with subtle symbols. Small circles, short lines, X's placed with careful intention. Ethan recognized the language immediately. Rally points, danger zones, corridors of movement. Someone had been guiding people here, quietly. Rex leaned in, nose hovering over the page, then lifted his head toward the eastern slope, as if confirming the map against memory. His ears flicked once, sharp and precise. "You remember," Ethan said softly. Rex didn't look at him. He didn't need to. Ethan moved to the back wall where Rex had stopped him earlier. He knelt, inspecting the old repairs more carefully now. Beneath the loose plank, beyond the rot, his fingers brushed metal. He froze. Slowly, he cleared away debris and pulled free a small steel box wrapped in oilcloth, sealed against moisture and time. It was heavier than expected, deliberate again. He carried it to the table and opened it. Inside lay order. Maps, folded and refolded until the creases had softened. Spare radio batteries sealed in waxed paper. A compass, old but well-maintained. A bundle of letters tied with twine. Not personal correspondence, but official-looking reports that had never been sent. Rescue logs, dates, weather conditions, notes written in the same tight hand. 2 hikers, disoriented but mobile. 1 solo traveler, hypothermia setting in. Storm broke faster than expected. Light kept them moving. Ethan's throat tightened. This wasn't a man hiding from the world. This was a man standing watch. At the bottom of the box lay a single envelope, thicker than the rest, addressed in block letters that hadn't wavered with age. Ethan Walker. Ethan stared at it for a long moment before opening it. The letter inside was short. No explanations, no apologies, no sentiment, just truth. I stayed because someone had to. If you're reading this, it means the hill needed you again. Don't confuse distance with safety. Keep the light when the storm comes. Ethan folded the letter carefully and set it down. He didn't sit. He didn't breathe for a moment. Rex rose and placed his head briefly against Ethan's thigh, grounding him without demand. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's neck, fingers pressing into familiar strength. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It assembled itself quietly, piece by piece. The cabin, the supplies, the logs, the light. None of it had been meant to save one person. It had been meant to stay. Ethan moved through the cabin with new eyes. He checked the radio, old but functional. Adjusted the antenna slightly, improving reception by degrees that only experience taught you to notice. He inventoried the blankets, the lanterns, the batteries. He didn't tell himself he was staying. He didn't need to. He stepped outside as the light faded again toward evening. Clouds thickened in the west, not threatening yet, but suggestive. Rex followed, sitting squarely at his side. Ethan reached up and turned on the porch light. The warm square of yellow cut into the gathering gray, visible farther down the slope than he expected. It wasn't bright. It didn't need to be. Rex watched it steadily, ears forward, satisfied. Later that night, Ethan made notes of his own. Not reflections, updates. Radio range improves after clearing ice from antenna. Light visible from lower trail once snow thins. Rex responds immediately to wind shifts before human perception. He paused, then added one more line. Staying matters. Sleep came easier than it had the night before, though it was still light and fractured. When Ethan woke near dawn, the decision had already been made, not consciously, but completely. He rose, split wood with steady economical swings, stacked it where a gloved hand could find it in the dark. He reinforced the railing along the eastern edge, where snow drifted deepest. He hung spare boots near the hearth, just in case. Rex mirrored him throughout, never in the way, never far. He no longer watched only for threats. He watched for arrival. By afternoon, the weather turned again. Not violently, but decisively. Rex rose from his place by the door and stood still, head angled toward the lower slope, body alert but calm. Ethan followed his gaze. Minutes passed. Then shapes emerged from the trees, 2 figures, young men by the look of them, moving too fast, jackets too thin, fear riding close beneath forced confidence. Rex stepped forward and sat several feet from them, solid and unmoving, his presence grounding without pressure. Ethan opened the door wider. "Come inside," he said. They didn't argue. Later, as they warmed themselves by the fire, Ethan marked their map with a heavy pencil, tracing the safe route down the mountain. He didn't lecture. He didn't scold. He just made sure they left better prepared than they arrived. When they were gone, Rex returned to his place by the door. Ethan stood beside him, looking out at the slope, the light behind them steady and sure. He hadn't planned this life, but standing there, he understood something essential. Some people survived storms by moving through them. Others survived by staying where they mattered most. Ethan Walker had finally learned which kind he was. The mountain learned his routine before anyone else did. Ethan rose before dawn, not because an alarm told him to, but because the sky changed its tone. He split wood while the world was still blue and indistinct, breath fogging the air, shoulders moving with the economy of a man who respected effort and hated waste. He checked the radio, adjusted the antenna when ice gathered, and swept the porch so the light could travel cleanly when it needed to. He didn't announce any of it. He just did the work. Rex moved with him, always a step ahead or a step behind, never in the way. The German shepherd's brown and black coat thickened against the cold, his muzzle showing the faintest dusting of gray that came with time and seasons spent outside. He didn't patrol in circles. He chose positions. By the door when weather shifted, near the eastern slope when the wind lied, closer to the hearth when visitors slept. Rex noticed first. Always. The rumor didn't start loudly. It never did. It traveled in pauses between sentences, in the way people lowered their voices when they mentioned the hill. In the ranger station down below, someone said, "If you lose the trail after the second bend, look up." In a diner an hour away, a trucker mentioned a light that stayed on when weather turned bad. No one claimed it as fact. They treated it like advice you didn't question. Ethan didn't hear any of this at first. He didn't go into town unless he needed supplies. When he did, he kept his cap low, his answers brief, his eyes moving the way they always had. People noticed the dog more than the man. Rex drew looks without seeking them, his posture calm and unmistakably trained. "He yours?" someone asked once. Ethan nodded. "Good dog." Ethan didn't correct them. Back on the mountain, the cabin became something else without ever being named. The spare radio stayed charged. Blankets hung by the door. Boots dried by the hearth, even when no one else was inside. Ethan reinforced the windbreak his predecessor had started years earlier, adding slats where snow drifted deepest, anchoring them with care. None of it felt heroic. It felt necessary. Rex learned the rhythms faster than Ethan expected. He would rise from his place by the door and stand still, head angled, ears lifting toward the lower slope minutes before anything appeared. Sometimes it was nothing, just weather shifting, the forest testing its voice. Sometimes it wasn't. One afternoon, clouds thickened without warning, the kind that arrived confident and stayed longer than predicted. Rex stood, alert but calm. Ethan followed his gaze and waited. Two figures emerged from the trees, young men by the look of them, breath coming too fast, jackets thin for the season. Brothers, as it turned out. They didn't run when they saw the cabin. They slowed, uncertainty giving way to relief. Rex approached first and sat several feet away, solid and breathing, letting his presence do the work words couldn't. Ethan opened the door wider and stepped aside. "Come in," he said. They didn't argue. He fed them soup, marked their map with a heavy pencil, traced the safe route with a finger until they nodded without asking questions. He sent them down the right way at first light. They left quieter than they arrived, gratitude complete but unspoken. After that, it happened again. A solo hiker who underestimated distance, a couple who trusted a shortcut too much, a man who followed a creek thinking it would lead him out and learned too late that winter bends water's promises. Rex noticed first every time. Sometimes with a change in posture, sometimes with that low sound in his chest that never rose to a bark unless it mattered. Ethan trusted it the way he once trusted a radio call that didn't need repeating. The light stayed on whenever weather turned. It wasn't bright. It didn't sweep the mountain. It didn't promise safety. It promised presence. One morning, weeks after the storm, a familiar SUV climbed the track under clear sky. Ethan recognized it before Rex did, not by sound, but by memory. The woman he had rescued stepped out, moving carefully, better prepared this time. Her hair was braided back, her jacket heavy and practical. She didn't linger. She thanked Ethan with a nod that meant more than words, then knelt and buried her face briefly in Rex's thick fur, whispering something only the dog heard. Rex accepted it without fuss, tail thumping once against the snow. "You stayed," she said to Ethan, as if that explained everything. Ethan nodded. He didn't tell her that staying hadn't been a single decision, that it had formed quietly, like frost, settling layer by layer until it was simply there. Winter deepened. Rex earned a name he didn't seem to notice. People called him the dog who noticed first. He didn't rush. He didn't bark unless it mattered. He appeared where panic was beginning to bloom and sat until fear remembered how to let go. Ethan watched it happen again and again, something in him loosening each time. He thought less often of the life he'd left behind. When the memory came, it no longer cut. It simply reminded him that he was here now, present in a way he hadn't been before. On nights when the wind tested the ridge, Ethan stood on the porch with Rex at his side, the warm square of light spilling outward into the dark. He rested a hand on the dog's head, fingers sinking into dense fur. Somewhere beyond the trees, a road would disappear again. Direction would fail. Fear would rise. And when it did, there would be a hill that didn't move, a door that didn't close, and a man who no longer mistook disappearance for peace. Rex sat beside him, ears forward, patient. The light stayed on. The mountain didn't announce recognition. People did. It came first with a knock on the door one late morning, measured and patient. Rex heard it before Ethan did. Not the sound itself, but the intent behind it. He rose from his place by the hearth and stood, ears forward, posture calm. Ethan opened the door to find a man standing just beyond the porch light's reach. He was older, tall in a way that had curved slightly with time. His coat was faded from years of weather, boots scarred and practical. A ranger's patch sat on his sleeve, worn thin at the edges. His eyes were pale and steady, the kind that cataloged details without making a show of it. "Mind if I come in?" the man asked. Ethan stepped aside. The ranger took in the cabin slowly, the hearth, the stacked wood, the radios charging by the wall. His gaze lingered on the notebook resting open on the table. "You've been busy," he said. Ethan shrugged. "Just keeping things running." The ranger nodded, as if that answer fit perfectly where he expected it to. "I'm Samuel Reed," he said. "Been covering this stretch for a long time." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "You knew the man who kept this place before?" Samuel's mouth twitched into something like a smile. "Knew of him. Worked around him. He didn't like titles." "He didn't leave one behind," Ethan said. No, Samuel agreed. He left work. They sat at the table, steam rising from 2 mugs Ethan hadn't remembered pouring. Samuel spoke plainly, without ceremony. He talked about the calls that never quite made sense until later. The hikers who showed up shaken but alive. The reports that ended with "found shelter," without coordinates or explanation. "There's a pattern," Samuel said, tapping the table once. "Patterns don't happen by accident." Ethan listened without interrupting. "You don't owe anyone anything," the ranger continued. "But you should know, people are adjusting their routes because of this place. Counting on it." Ethan felt the words settle into him, not as pressure, but as truth. "I'm not running a station," he said. Samuel met his eyes. "No, you're standing watch." They finished their coffee in silence. When Samuel left, he paused at the door and glanced down at Rex, who sat squarely by the threshold, unmoving. "He's good," Samuel said quietly. Ethan nodded. "He notices first. Best kind." Winter stretched on, but it no longer felt endless. Ethan didn't mark the days. He marked conditions. Wind behavior, snowpack changes. He updated the notebook with his own careful hand, adding notes where the old ones ended, not replacing them, continuing them. Rex remained constant. Some nights, Ethan dreamed of roads he couldn't see clearly, of voices he couldn't quite understand. He woke before fear could take shape. Rex already awake, already steady. One evening, as clouds gathered low and heavy, a group arrived. 3 adults, exhausted but upright, led by a woman whose confidence had outpaced her caution. They weren't panicked yet, but they were close. Rex met them at the edge of the porch light and sat. Just sat. The woman's shoulders dropped. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Inside, as they warmed themselves, she asked Ethan why he stayed up here alone. Ethan considered the question. "I'm not alone," he said, resting a hand briefly on Rex's collar. She nodded slowly, understanding more than she said. Later that night, when the cabin was quiet again, Ethan stood by the window, looking out at the dark slope below. The porch light cast its familiar square into the snow, steady and unwavering. For the first time, he allowed himself to think about the life he'd left behind. Not with regret, but with clarity. He thought of the man he had been when silence felt like refuge, when disappearing seemed kinder than standing still. He understood now that silence wasn't absence, it was space, and space could be filled with purpose. Rex joined him, pressing close, solid, and warm. Ethan rested his forearm against the dog's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of breath. "I didn't plan this," Ethan said quietly. Rex's ears flicked once. "I know," Ethan added. The wind shifted outside, testing the ridge again. The cabin held. The light stayed on. Somewhere down the mountain, someone would lose direction soon. Fear would whisper its old lies, and when it did, there would be something to look for. Not a miracle, a presence. Ethan Walker stood where he mattered, not because he was asked, because he stayed. Winter did not end suddenly. It softened. Snow still fell, but it no longer buried the mountain in silence. It settled instead, lighter now, revealing what it had once hidden: edges, paths, distance. The ridge breathed easier. The world remembered how to move again. Ethan noticed the change the way he noticed everything now, without urgency, without resistance. He stood on the porch in the early gray of morning, multicam jacket zipped halfway, breath rising slow and even. The U.S. Army veteran cap sat low on his brow, shadowing eyes that no longer searched the past as often as they once had. The dog tags at his chest rested still. They no longer knocked against bone with every movement. Rex sat beside him. The German shepherd's posture was calm, ears upright, gaze steady on the lower slope. His tactical collar was scuffed from months of weather, the name Rex still clear against the fabric. He hadn't changed in skill. He had changed in purpose. Below them, the forest woke in pieces. A branch shed snow. A creek cracked free of ice. Somewhere far off, a vehicle started and stopped again, sound bending gently now instead of lying. Ethan turned off the porch light, not because it wasn't needed, because daylight had finally earned its place back. He didn't feel relief. He felt completion. The decision to stay had never been a single moment. It had been made quietly, every day, in small actions that stacked into something solid. The work, the waiting, the understanding that presence mattered more than explanation. Inside the cabin, the notebook lay open on the table. Ethan added one final entry beneath the most recent notes. Winter loosening. Light visible farther down the slope. Rex alert, calm. He paused, then wrote one more line. Staying was the point. He closed the notebook carefully and placed it back where it belonged. That afternoon, Samuel Reed returned one last time before spring roads reopened fully. He didn't bring forms or questions. He brought news, quiet, practical, delivered the way men like them understood best. "They're updating the maps," Samuel said, standing near the door. "Not marking this place exactly, just adjusting routes." Ethan nodded. Samuel glanced at Rex. "Dog's earned his reputation." Rex didn't react. He never did. When Samuel left, he didn't shake Ethan's hand. He gave him a nod instead, the kind passed between men who didn't need to say more. As the weeks passed, fewer people came up the mountain. That was how Ethan knew the work was working. Those who did arrive came prepared, quieter, more attentive. They asked fewer questions and listened more. Some stayed for warmth, some for direction. All left better than they arrived. One evening, near the end of winter, Ethan stood on the porch again, Rex pressed against his leg. The sky was clear, stars sharp and bright, the kind that made distance feel honest instead of threatening. Ethan rested his hand on Rex's head, fingers sinking into dense fur. "Good job," he said softly. Rex leaned into the touch, tail thumping once, restrained, certain. Ethan thought, briefly, of the man he had been when he first arrived here. The one who believed disappearing was the same as resting. The one who mistook silence for safety. He understood now that silence was only empty if you refused to fill it. The mountain didn't need a hero. It needed someone who stayed. When spring finally came, it did so without ceremony. Snow retreated inch by inch, revealing trails that had always been there. The porch light stayed off more often now, but it remained ready. Always ready. Ethan didn't leave. He didn't announce that he was staying either. He simply remained where he mattered. Rex continued to sit by the door when weather shifted, ears lifting at sounds too faint for human attention. He noticed first. Always had. Always would. Somewhere beyond the ridge, someone would misjudge distance again. Fear would whisper, direction would blur. And when that happened, there would still be a hill that did not move, a door that did not close, a man who no longer believed peace meant absence. Sometimes the miracle is not that the storm passes. Sometimes the miracle is that someone stays while it does. Ethan Walker stood on the porch as dusk settled, the last light of day touching the cabin walls. Rex sat beside him, steady and silent. The mountain watched, the work remained, and the light, whether on or off, was never truly gone.